It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone, on a Monday, kind of Tuesday, right? Hope you had a good or good enough Memorial Day weekend, despite the buzzkill weather we had in the tri-state area for most of it. And I hope you stopped to give some meaningful thought to the sacrifice of those who have died in wars, even if you haven't been personally touched by that kind of tragic and, I'd say, so often tragically preventable loss. We're happy to have as our first guest for this week Senator Chris Murphy, who comes on to speak both to his Connecticut constituents locally and to our national politics podcast audience. Often mentioned as a potential 2028 Democratic presidential candidate, Senator Murphy has a very thought-provoking new book. He is also one of 3 Democratic co-sponsors who have forced a vote every week since March on a resolution to stop the war in Iran. And last week, for the first time, this barely cracked the news cycle, but a preliminary vote on that got enough Republican support to pass. So we'll talk about that. Also, the widely panned DNC autopsy report released last week on why they did so badly in 2024 and what they should change. And the book, which is called Crisis of the Common Good, The Fight for Meaning and Connection in America. And I'll just say, as a little bit of an introduction to the book before we bring on Senator Murphy, it includes his framing of 6 cults. He uses the word cults that he thinks Americans have fallen prey to: a cult of profit, a cult of everywhere, meaning rootlessness and globalization, a cult of technology, a cult of consumption, a cult of credentialism, and a cult of corruption. And he's got solutions to propose for each one that he hopes can restore some of that meaning and connection that the subtitle references, and who knows, maybe fight political polarization and the threats to democracy that we face in the bargain. Senator, always good to have you on here. Welcome back to WNYC and our National Politics Podcast.
Well, always great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
And listeners, we have Senator Murphy for 25 minutes, so we will have time for some calls and texts, but this is shorter than some of our other lead segments. So please remember to ask questions, not make speeches. We will keep you concise today. Texting is a good idea, 212-433 WNYC, but of course you can call if you want to talk to the senator with your voice, 212-433-9692, same number. So let me start with something from the book that might surprise people, that you concluded a few years ago that right-wing thinkers, you cite J.D. Vance as an example, were having a more honest conversation about America's spiritual emptiness than anyone on the left. More honest in what ways?
Yeah, when I say spiritual emptiness, I don't mean religious emptiness. I mean the lack of purpose and meaning that many Americans feel when they wake up in the morning in an economy that has become, almost purely extractive, in a culture that has been flattened, where people are asked to be global citizens rather than citizens of a local place. I do think the right did a better job than the left of really diagnosing the almost metaphysical hurt that many people were feeling, and they adapted and adopted policies that were racist and xenophobic and reckless, but gave people a place to go, right? Mostly scapegoats. Democrats, have tended over the last 20 years to be very technocratic in our solutions. And so our solutions had merit, like lowering the cost of prescription drugs or trying to incrementally increase the minimum wage, but it didn't really speak to the way that people were feeling fundamentally out of control of their lives. And so this book is about how we've kind of lost a sense of connection to each other, a sense of obligation to our community rather than just to our own material betterment, and how Democrats can do a better job of, really connecting in with that spiritual rot, I think, that's happening in the country, and offer bigger solutions than we have in the past, so as to counteract the Republican solutions, which tend to be just, who's blaming Muslims and immigrants and gay kids.
Yeah, but is it the job of a senator, or a president or politics in general, to address spiritual emptiness as opposed to focusing on material fairness and transparency and leave spiritual things to private sector communities of meaning?
Well, this is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And what does that document say? That document says that government should exist to guarantee people the right to pursue happiness. That was a fundamentally revolutionary phrase. And it begs politicians to actually consider what brings people happiness. And the reality is that having a job and an income and material success is an element of happiness. But what happiness really is, and we know this from our own lives and from endless studies on happiness, happiness really is having positive relationships in your life, waking up every day with a sense of shared purpose with your community. And those things are less accessible today than ever before, in part because government has constructed an economy in which leisure time is a luxury. You have to work 70 hours and you don't have time to join a church or a civic club to find communion. Our technology is unregulated, which pries us away from in-person connection. Kids are spending half as much time in in-person socialization today as they were a generation ago. We've decided to create an economy that rewards Amazons and Walmarts, not local businesses, another place where people find connection and community. So I do think we've set up a bunch of rules that govern our culture and our economy that make people more rootless, make people less fulfilled and connected. And we should be honest about how government has failed in its mission to make people more happy.
You've already gotten a pushback text from one listener regarding one of the cults on the list that I mentioned, and you referenced it in your first answer, what you call the cult of everywhere, referring to things like rootlessness and globalism. So I'll read the text first. Listener writes, "What is Murphy's problem with globalism? Isn't it the opposite of isolationism?" So with that, why don't you describe what you mean by the cult of everywhere?
Oh, I think it feels really empty to most people to be told that you are now a global citizen. I think for many of us, we can feel very lonely. Sometimes we can feel our loneliest in a giant crowd. People want to be a citizen of a healthy, unique local place. I was kicking off this book tour in my hometown of Wethersfield just a few days ago, a place that I grew up in that was very unique. I shopped at locally owned businesses. The powerful economic people in my life lived in my town, the people who owned the big grocery stores, the people that owned the businesses that my parents worked at. And today we live in a world where the owner of your business is probably a private equity fund who you will never meet. Your local paper has probably disappeared. The stores you shop at are now online. You probably get a lot of your goods without even speaking to a human being. I think we should have a very purposeful policy about breaking up big concentrated retail and broader corporate power, restoring power to locally owned economies. We should find ways to support and resuscitate local journalism so that you can find more out about the people that you live with. Again, let's have leisure time again. Let's have a living wage, allow you to work 40 hours and no more. That's what I'm talking about. I know there are benefits to the global economy, but I think it has left people feeling very, very lonely to not be connected to their local community and being told, just be a citizen of the world.
As a follow-up to this, how does that relate, if at all, to the debate over immigration for you? Because, at the heart of Trumpism, and we see it in Europe too without Trump, is the fear that too much immigration will overwhelm the culture. French culture, American culture, Western culture, whatever we label it. And you'd probably call it xenophobia. But does your framing of a cult of everywhere feed into that on purpose or not?
No, it really doesn't. And in fact, I explain in the book that Donald Trump has been successful by talking about immigration through a lens of control, right? People do feel fundamentally out of control of their lives today. They put more energy into their work and they don't see economic mobility. They don't control their kids' lives anymore because their kids are sort of dragged around by this algorithm that is hidden to parents. Donald Trump talks about immigration through a lens of control. We're going to control our border. We're going to decide who comes into this country and who doesn't. And that speaks to the way that people feel out of control of their lives, and they feel that the government looks powerless in the face of these big global trends like migration and the outsourcing of factory jobs, the drug trade that brings fentanyl seamlessly into this country. So that's why I think Democrats need to be talking, the left needs to be talking to people through a narrative of control. We are going to give you more control of your life. That's through the expansion of labor unions, a dramatic increase in the minimum wage, the regulation of these technologies so that parents are in control of their kids' lives again. And I think that will make Trump's xenophobic immigration messaging less potent if people find healthier ways to be able to exert control in their personal lives.
Let's take a phone call from Doris in Boulder, Colorado. Doris, you're on WNYC with Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, author now of a new book called Crisis of the Common Good, The Fight for Meaning and Connection in America. Hi, Doris.
Hi there. How are you? I'm an expat from New York, and I do follow what goes on there very closely. My feeling about what's going on in this country, the malaise, and even the rot, is directly traceable to one person. And you know who that is, but I'll mention his name, our president, who has fostered a feeling of hatred and discontent among the people, one for the other. And that's where it comes from. I don't remember this feeling 10, 15 years ago. To me, it is directly traceable to President Trump.
Doris, thank you very much. But you say in the book, Senator, that Trump is a symptom, not just a cause, right?
Yeah. I mean, I do have a little bit of a different take. I mean, obviously, I spend my entire life, right, every hour of every day trying to fight back against this president and his hateful and reckless agenda. So I am very much here for the fight against Donald Trump. But yes, the book's theory is that he is a symptom, not the primary cause of a nation that feels like it is unspooling. And that's why the book is divided up into these 6 chapters, talking about how, frankly, both Democrats and Republicans created an economy where the only thing that matters is profit, that a good company is a company that abuses its workers, that empties out its community, but makes a profit. We could choose to build a common good capitalism. Both Republicans and Democrats have fed into this idea that to be a good American is to just buy things, to buy the newest version of an iPhone, to upgrade your car, instead of calling on Americans to give back in service, to be a citizen first and a consumer second. I'm not both sidesing this. I realize Republicans are much more to blame for this descent into materialism and consumerism, consumptionism as a definition of what makes a good American. But I do think we'd be a little foolish to think that if we beat Donald Trump or Republicans in the next couple of elections, but we don't address the rules of our culture and our economy that are sort of shifting us from a we nation to a me nation, that will fix the problem.
Interesting. You still are pressing buttons on the globalism one, and we want to get to some of the other of your 6 cults. But here's another text. But globalism means caring for the environment in this crucial time, and empathy for others, and helping. So when I look at a few of these, I kind of sum them up as sometimes globalism is a progressive value. It can be a universalist ethic that emphasizes everyone's common humanity. Your book is called Crisis of the Common Good, which de-emphasizes nationalism and leads to a passion for universal human rights and equity, kind of, summing up what's coming in here. One more response on that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I obviously am an internationalist, so I am not in this book calling for a broad retrenchment. I have for years argued that America needs to be a force for good in the world, just in a fundamentally different way than we have projected power over most of the last 20 years. That's why, as you mentioned at the outset, I've been bringing a resolution before the Senate floor every week for the last few months to end the war in Iran. But to be honest, this globally integrated economy has not always been good for the environment. Locally sourced economies where your food is from a local farm, where the manufactured goods you buy are produced not in China but in the state next to you, is a better deal for the environment and the ecology. So I do think there's an argument to build sort of healthier, more localized economies. I think that will give people a sense of rootedness spiritually. But I also think there's arguments that by making our economies a little bit smaller, making our supply chains a little bit more local, it has a benefit to the environment as well.
One more on one of the cults before we get to some news of the day with you, including the progress of your Iran war resolution. Again, your 6 cults for our listeners: profit, everywhere, which we've been talking about, technology, consumption, credentialism, and corruption. I think the cults of profit, consumption, and corruption are the easiest to understand. So challenge us with one of the others. What do you mean by the cult of credentialism?
So the cult of credentialism is this idea that whether we did this purposefully or not, we have sorted America into those with a higher education credential, a university degree, and those without. We live in an economy today where it's more important than ever before to have that degree, but harder to get it. And what it has done is really separate America into two. And whether you like it or not, the people who don't have the degree feel like they are judged as less worthy than the people that have the degree. They feel humiliated that they haven't been able to access that credential that allows them to get into a world of economic mobility. And so I do think that part of our coming apart as a nation is because we have two Americas, one with a college degree and one without. And I just think that we need to admit that this was a mistake of the sort of new neoliberal order, and that we have to do some radical things to get more people a meaningful amount of education that allows them a shot at economic mobility. So in the book, I say we should guarantee some amount of higher education to every American. We should just say that 12th grade isn't enough. We're not going to pay for live-away 4 years college for everybody, but we're going to pay for some amount of higher education for everybody. And we should pressure the elite institutions to be more inclusive, to open their doors to more people, to stop letting in as many kids of donors as they do today. There's something fundamentally broken in higher education that is leading to our spiritual rot, this separation between two castes, those with degrees and those without degrees, and we've got to fix that ASAP.
Looking at your proposed solutions to the crisis of the common good, including the one that you just mentioned, guarantee some degree of access to post-high school education for everybody, many of these will be familiar as progressive politics positions. Get big money out of politics with a constitutional amendment that overturns the Citizens United unlimited spending ruling, increase the minimum wage to $30 an hour, make it easier to form unions, ban insurance companies from denying coverage for doctor-recommended treatments, break up big tech. If you're aiming for a common good consensus, can you get right-leaning Americans not to see you as just another left-leaning, big government Democrat if these things are maybe the heart of a presidential campaign one day, let's say?
Well, listen, I do think that every idea that I outline in this book are ideas that speak to both the right and the left. And what I am also arguing in this book is for us to spend more time on Trump voters who might not agree with Democrats on abortion or climate or guns, but who actually do see the need for a more robust government intervention to break up concentrated power and to make work pay. This is this is sort of the crowd that J.D. Vance initially was speaking to. Trump basically killed that nascent movement in the Republican Party that was friendlier to unions, that thought more government intervention was necessary to break up these big tech companies, for instance. But I do think there are a lot of Republicans who would support a constitutional amendment to ban private money from politics. I think there are a lot of Republican voters out there who are for a higher minimum wage, who do think that these big companies have too much power. And my argument is that we should spend more time on doing outreach to Trump's base on those issues, unrigging the economy and unrigging the democracy. That doesn't mean that as progressives we don't continue to fight for civil rights and gun control, but I don't think our politics are as hopeless as many people think they are. I think there are a lot on the right that when it comes to economic reform, empowering workers, regulating technologies, are willing to give government some new tools.
How different is this from what Bernie Sanders tried to do as a presidential candidate, emphasize a lot of the things in, I think, very similar language, except he'd go millionaires and billionaires, to what you're putting out, and kind of de-emphasize the social issues for the economic populist ones?
Well, I talk about in this book my belief that Bernie has gotten it more right than any other Democratic politician, and my frustration that many in the mainstream of the Democratic Party still view him and his movement as a fringe threat. I think that his message continues to be the crossover message. You look at the tens of thousands of people who show up to see him. There are very socially conservative people in those audiences. There are some Trump supporters in those audiences. I want to start winning elections, and I do think that requires the Democratic Party and the left to be more pugilistic and more confrontational with corporate power. So that is, and I actually think that that is part of how you build a broader coalition that includes many of Trump's supporters. It means we probably have to be a little bit less judgmental about the fact that they might not right now agree with us on some of our cultural and social priorities. But that, to me, is the way that you capture a potential realignment in this country between the traditional left and members of Trump's base who now finally, for the first time, may see him as a fake populist and are willing to listen to a party that is actually going to see the world through a worker versus corporate power lens.
News of the day question from a listener. They write, what are your plans for dealing with the federal Delaney Hall Detention Center in Newark with a new detainee hunger strike and yesterday's melee in which protester and Senator Andy Kim were tear-gassed?
Yeah, I mean, I hope people have...
I think it was pepper sprayed.
It was pepper sprayed, but I mean, just some remarkable images, and all of us have been in touch with Andy to make sure that he is well. I mean, listen, as you know, many of us have just drawn a line in the sand and say you are not going to get a single Democratic vote for this inhumane and illegal detention policy. We are the minority party, so we can withhold our votes, which we have. They are attempting right now, as we speak, to try to override our resistance by passing funding for DHS and ICE with only Republican votes. But we will also go to the court system to try to shut down these detention centers that are being illegally funded. I'm thinking of innovative ways to try to shut them down. I just sent out a letter to every jurisdiction in which one of these new detention centers is being housed, reminding them that the minute Democrats take over, we will pull all the funding for those detention centers. And so you will have a big empty warehouse on your hands that will be a blight on your neighborhood. And so you probably shouldn't get in the business right now of a center that's only going to be open for a couple years. So we are using every lever at our disposal to try to stop these from being built and shut down the ones that exist.
All right. I know you got to go to another thing in a couple of minutes, so explain to the listeners what this resolution regarding the war is that you're co-sponsoring and what happened with Republicans on the resolution that was new last week, and anything you might want to throw in based on what President Trump has been announcing or hinting at over the weekend about some kind of deal.
Well, I mean, listen, on the deal, I want this war over. So I'm likely going to support any deal that ends the war because every day it goes on, it becomes more humiliating for the United States and worse for this country. But let's just be honest about the deal he's talking about. It essentially is America paying Iran billions of dollars to just get back to where we were before the war. We're going to give them billions in sanctions relief so they open the strait. It just is final clear evidence of what a disaster this war was from the beginning, which is why every single week we are bringing a vote on the Senate floor to end the war. We have this unique ability under the Senate rules to bring what's called a war powers resolution to the Senate floor. It's required to be called for a vote. And if it passes and is signed by the president, or it passes and is vetoed by the president and we override it, the president has to pull all funding for the war. For the first time, as you mentioned, last week, we got enough Republican votes to cross the 50-vote threshold. And by the way, it can't be filibustered, so 50 votes is enough. Every week, another Republican joins us. And so, there is a theoretical world where not so far in the distant future, enough Republicans join us that we might actually be able to override a veto. I'm not saying that's likely, but it's a potential result, and it's why we're not giving up. At the very least, having this vote every week just continues to put pressure on Republicans to come out in public opposition to a war that's driving up costs and making America less safe. And again, for the American people, they think this war has nothing to do with them. I mean, it does not help them in their daily lives. It doesn't feel like it's protecting them. They want government to get back to the kind of things that build a culture of the common good.
One really quick pushback question.
Yeah.
If you just pass a bill that stops the war, why doesn't that equal Iran wins?
Well, Iran is winning every day that this war continues. I mean, every single day that this war goes on, they are becoming more powerful. They are becoming more influential. They are locking down their control of the strait. The only way to stop Iran from becoming more powerful is for this war to end as quickly as possible.
All right. I'm going to let you go because I know you got to run to another thing, and then I'm going to tell the listeners about your events tonight and tomorrow in New York and D.C. Senator Chris Murphy, thank you very much for coming on.
Always good to talk to you, Brian. Thanks.
The book is called Crisis of the Common Good, The Fight for Meaning and Connection in America. If you want to see Senator Murphy discussing the book in person, he's got a Manhattan event tonight and a D.C. one tomorrow. In Manhattan, it's at 6:30 p.m. tonight at Judson Memorial Church on Washington Square South. Senator Murphy in conversation with Katie Couric there. Tickets available from the McNally Jackson bookstore at mcnallyjackson.com. That's tonight. In D.C., he'll be in conversation with Jonathan Capehart at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. That's Wednesday night at 6th and I, 600 I Street Northwest in Washington, D.C. Brian Lehrer on WNYC. Coming up next, a concept that's an environmental one that we've been talking about on this show for many years that may actually turn into legislation any day in Albany. Stay with us.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.